It's now my pleasure to introduce Alastair Colin-Jones, who will be leading our final panel of the forum. Alastair is the Senior Manager for Business Research at Mars Catalyst, and he was formerly the Knowledge Manager at the Skoll Centre for Social Entrepreneurship here at SBS. Welcome, Alastair.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for sticking with us. It's the final sprint here. So this morning, we have a fantastic panel of leaders from diverse backgrounds and experiences, from business, from academia, from politics, banking, and foundations. They hail from Singapore, the USA, the UK, and Israel. And over the next hour, we're going to be discussing the question of how can business be transformed as a force for the common good? And given we're in Oxford, a city with proud and perhaps unparalleled academic credentials, although I know there's two cities by the name of Cambridge that might want to disagree, I'd like to introduce this panel with an appropriately academic approach, that of defining terms and making observations. Academics can make a pretty decent career of defining terms, but I only have 5 minutes, so I'll define one term and make a quick observation. The first thing to note about the question is that we're not asking why business needs to be transformed. We're asking how. And thankfully, I think we've moved past the debate of asking why. In fact, this conference has been focused on answering the question of how. Whether through case studies, masterclasses, keynotes, or panel discussions, we've been exploring questions of how, seeking to equip you as practitioners with valuable insights. But this panel, I think, takes questions of how a bit further. And I say further because the key word here is transformed. Transformation isn't any old activity. It is a substantive undertaking. Nothing is transformed without significant courage, energy, and effort. The Oxford Dictionary, no less, says it means a marked change in nature or form. Psychologists would even say that it's a change in self-consciousness. So when it comes to business, what does transformation really mean? And I think the answer is important not only for this panel, but even for those of you who are considering your next career move and the trajectory of your life. Let me explain. Imagine with me for a moment that the purpose of business today is to grow apples. Today, we generally accept that over the decades, business has grown quite a few rotten apples. And as a result, in recent years, business has started to change its practices to grow better apples. And so to get better apples from a tree, you might consider changing your fertilizing practice, or pruning that tree regularly, or doing some mulching. This will certainly help us get better apples. And this is what I think we're doing with sustainability, CSR, triple bottom line accounting, and the like. But this isn't really transformation. It is an improvement. It is a positive development. After all, we're making bad apples better apples. The problem is, what if the purpose of business isn't to produce apples anymore? What if it's to produce plums? What if business isn't actually being asked simply to go from bad apples to good apples anymore? But such is the urgency of the challenges that we face that business must produce an entirely different fruit. Clearly, no matter how good our practices are, we will only get apples from an apple tree. And so the task of transforming business for the common good goes beyond good practice and includes the planting of a new seed. To grow this new seed, to take on the task of transformation, we need practitioners like you, who will be willing to be mocked for doing something different, for pioneering not only new practices, but for planting a new seed and an entirely different fruit. To plant a new seed, to change the purpose of business, now this is transformation. But transformation isn't sufficient on its own either. Remember that once the plum tree is planted, it still needs those good practices. They're equally applicable when we're growing plums. It needs fertilizing, it needs mulching, it needs pruning. So don't forget about all those good practices that you've learned throughout the previous days. Business needs to be transformed, but without also having good practices, we'll just end up with bad plums. That's why it's crucial that the economics of mutuality does both. Provide new practices, but also challenge the very purpose of business, as we heard yesterday. The question that strikes at the very heart of things: what is the right level of profit for the corporation? So the focus of this panel isn't on how we can improve our current practices, though that's important, but on how we can plant a new seed that will transform business for the common good. At the macro level, what is the role of politics, of foundations, of finance, and of those not in business as well as in it? But also at the personal level, where is your own heart? What is the role of each of us as individuals as we think about our career aspirations? Remember that transformation needs transformed people. Each member of the panel has recognized in their own sphere of influence the importance of changing current business practices, but they've also recognized that transformation is needed. So if you want to be transformational in your career, there will be a lot of insight for you to glean here. Could I please welcome the panel to the stage? So Hal thought he had a pretentious title and renamed his talk Tots and Bots. We've got a pretentious title, so what about Roots and Fruits? So I'd like to introduce Avishay, Professor Avishay Braverman to begin with. He sat at the end there. Professor Braverman received his PhD in economics from Stanford University. He served for 14 years as the senior economist and division chief at the World Bank, then served as the president of Ben-Gurion University in Israel for over 15 years, launching a career in Israeli politics, serving as the Minister of Minority Affairs, the chairman of the Finance Committee, the chairman of the Economic Affairs Committee, and in each role, you've passionately pursued outcomes and policies to deliver social justice. And today, there's more money in our system than ever before. Yet it's also true that there's never been such inequality between the wealthiest and the poorest. The economics is undeniably unjust, and historically, business has not only been complicit in this, but central to it. Practically, to what extent do you see politics taking an active role in transforming business as the force for common good?
We speak from here or from?
From there is fine.
Thank you. Well, first I'd say it's a privilege to be here. I must say that exactly 3 years ago, by the day, I met Bruno and Jay, and since the only thing I can have to share, particularly with the young people, that I went through the systems, 14 years international economics, in the World Bank, then in academia, then in politics. I saw the failures, I saw what's good, and I don't know that I can give you a solution, but I can share with you my experience. Before I go to politics, it's very clear today that in many places in the world, including my country, politics is run by people that are narcissists, myopic, playing divide and conquer. So the likelihood in the short term that the enlightenment, the serving elite, will come from politics is declining. And therefore, by default, the corporation that I was so fortunate that after Bruno and Jay, I come to Oxford to meet Colin Meyer, that it's not only Oxford, it's its own substance and credibility, that we know that by default, though maybe in your survey, corporations are very low, but they are probably the source of hope because they become powerful and they have the possibility to work for the long term and change, while in many places it's not. Also, another place that look for the long term, and there's some distinguished people here from China and Singapore that try new experiment, it's over there. But I want to say 3 points. First, what you do here in the economic of mutuality, we tried, I was part of it in the World Bank, and it's failed. So I want to explain because you have to learn from experience. When I joined the World Bank in 1976, idealistic like you, I was 28 and a half, PhD from Stanford, changing the world. The idea was, and the book that was immediately published was redistribution through growth. The same slogans renovate themselves all the time. The key issue was that if you do only financial rate of return and you don't take the negative externalities on the environment, on inequality, it's wrong. And in this time, operation research optimization was so developed, so therefore, we, the people there, I gave you the references, many people from England, apply this project evaluation when you do cost-benefit analysis, when you do shadow prices, the duality, take into consideration the shadow price of inequality, the shadow price of environment, and it failed. It failed for two reasons. One, Ronald Reagan came to the bank, and the idea of looking at inequality and others, and Courier came disappear, but something else was. There was tremendous abuse, because there will be projects that the financial rate of return was dismal, but if you took shadow price as you wish for the environment, for inequality is a path. And therefore, many bad projects were going around in rural development over the world, and this enormous literature that I recommend that somebody would do a PhD and go for that disappeared. When I talked to Martin, why today EOM can be successful? A, because nothing is more powerful than an idea whose time has come. All of a sudden, CEOs that are moral and distinguished look at the eyes of their children and say, what are you doing? The world may disappear soon with the environment. Look at this inequality, and you tell us that you are moral people. So they have to address the issue. They have to. Before, it was not the game. Second, as I said, there is China and Singapore that are looking for a new model. So there is opportunity now, and therefore I don't want to go in depth of that, but in the second phase of EOM, people have to reflect, and I can assist you in putting some of the best of the people in the world that work on that, some get against the world, that work with us in these experiments, and say what failed, and how you make sure that people don't play this weighted average game with cheating accounting or cheating economics. That's number one. Number two, yes, corporations are the spearhead. They have to lead. People that either come for family business with enlightened leadership, like Mars, like Hoffman-LaRoche, like Moulier, more complicated in the public corporation. But the question for the long term, even if you start creating these examples, there is the macro issue. And there are 3 points I want to bring. Late 80s, I was in charge of the World Bank of Agricultural Policies, Food Security, etc. And cocoa, coffee, Africa. Everybody, we wrote the paper. If you focus on one commodity, you'll be dead. Because no matter that you'll improve the objective function, looking not only in financial rate of return, human capital, commodity prices will go down and you're dead. Therefore, you have to diversify. You need not just a corporation focusing on coffee doing good, you need a portfolio. Problem, never was much applied. Look at government, look at the corruption, look at the issue. Same issue. You cannot do it by yourself. You have to initiate, so moral people with integrity may be a new type of political leadership. That was also addressed by Patrick on the example of Uber in Peru. Everybody buys a car. Next year, everybody loses everything. And people see that. Third point, my good friend Al Varian gave a tremendous address yesterday. Now, Al gave you the nice part of technology, where people work maybe in the US 3-4 days and everybody will be nice. But I remind you, technology is a wild horse, and if we don't change taxation and distribution, we'll pay for all these people, because the old structures between production and distribution that we created. I'm 70 years old. After Second World War, we wanted to have a world of globalization, inclusion, and therefore we created the World Bank, the IMF, the WTO. Most of them are not functional, very dysfunctional. the institution of the old world, of the old world. New world have to be created. Usually, things will fall apart first. But in the game that leaders like sitting here are starting, the responsibility of the new serving elite that come from Oxford, and I believe in serving elite, not in the elite that serves itself, because with the masses you can always divide and conquer, like most of the leaders in the world doing today. It's very tough, because we do not have a recipe for how to make the new institutions and the new world. Everybody knows we're living in instability and will fall apart. So we have no exact answer. My answer, to create island of sanity in a world of insanity and increasing instability. Try to good, connect with powerful people that want to go good, that are older, and somehow, where this world may fall apart, because there will be financial crisis, the monetary system. Yes, I'm finishing. There will be ecological crisis. In the midst of that, you people that have to get your career, to build a family, to be successful in institutions, that sometimes you see the hypocrisy and legal corruption. You have to find the guide to your soul, because on you, the world will depend. And I'll finish in one sentence. One of the brilliant students here yesterday quoted two parts of the great sage Rabbi Hillel that lived in the same time of Jesus. And Rabbi Hillel gave the three principles for action for a good society and individual, which my mentor, Nobel laureate Kenneth Herron, that passed last year, used, I think, either his Nobel address or something else. And what are the three principles that I try to apply in my life, and many times I fail? Only when you're 70, you can allow yourself not to be dependent.
Avishay?
And the three principles are, Im ein ani limili, if I'm not for myself, who am I? If I'm not for myself, who is for me? You have to take responsibility, individually. Corporation was individual responsibility no matter what. But then the second question, וכשאני לעצמי מה אני? If I'm only for myself, who am I? What the Reverend Professor Perry tell you. We have something that have to be united. They call it the spirit of God or consciousness. If we're not aware of that, technology won't save the world. And the third principle of Hillel, if not now, then when? Every day the world is created afresh. Power to you, and all the older people can support you in leading transformation in the world. Thank you.
Thanks, Avishay. I promise you'll get to talk again. So.
I'm willing to come, I told Colin, sometimes
sorry, that wasn't a
in the
prompt for you.
future to talk at length. I say everything I have to say to you.
So the next panelist I'd like to introduce is Serena Cao. She was born in Taiwan, but is now a Singaporean citizen. She grew up primarily in Singapore and then the USA. She's traveled extensively around the world. She studied and then started her career in the USA and later China, gaining significant experience across the banking sector and non-for-profit sector. She now lives in Singapore, and since 2011, she's chaired the Santé Foundation, a 3-generation-old privately endowed philanthropic foundation. And in 2014, Serena started GoPurpose, an incubator for social enterprises and a consultancy to nonprofits looking to develop their business models. So Serena, your experience in both banking and philanthropy means you've got something of a hybrid perspective, with banking on the one hand and philanthropy on the other. So how has this hybrid perspective shaped your views on business becoming a force for the common good?
Right. So in order for us to look at your answers to the question, I think we have to first look at the traditional philanthropy model, which is what we used to have and what we still have, the norm for philanthropy and charity. So for the world, we have actually increased our givings to charities from year to year. However, the disparity ratio has been growing bigger and bigger and bigger with the internet age, as well as the displacement of jobs due to our new softwares, new technologies. So as I look into the issues, most of these bigger companies, when they are doing endowment to non-for-profits, it's a no-brainer that they actually would give most of the money to UN. So if all the money are going to bigger organizations who are the non-for-profits, where are we right now? Why are we still seeing disparity growing? So answers are there. Second of all is that when you look at smaller non-for-profits or even social enterprises, where the CEOs runs a team of less than 20 people or even 5 people, and they're trying so hard and passionately to leave the purpose in clear goals of what they are targeting for their lifetime. At the same time, while helping whoever the underprivileged, what they're trying to solve on the ground, they were also trying very hard to fundraise. And there are a lot of these people. And where are we targeting? So I've always been an advocate for sustainability. Sustainability means innovation, keeping up with innovation, innovative ideas, and how do we keep things going. As a family business, third generation shareholder, I feel that in order for me to carry on the philanthropic foundation's morale and practice, I need to keep innovating of a newer model to keep this sustainability going on. And what I felt that traditional philanthropy can give you instant solutions to poverty of people who has issues of completing education due to financial issues or people who has problems of seeking medical care. But how about what's next? Am I able to create a sustainable model if I were to leave the world tomorrow? I probably can't. So it's very important that we galvanize an effort together today, all of us, to put in the effort of doing teachings, making our words into actions, teaching someone who to fish, to teach them, to give them a new skill set because of our transformation of old norms right now, which we are in a subset of setting a new norms. So for our actions, what we are going to shape, for the future, current, future, is going to really affect how our world and next generation will be, including what our job will be. So from there, I hope I actually answer your questions, and that's very important for me to assume all the skill sets, to create this hybrid model. Thank you.
Thank you, Serena. And next panelist. Our next panelist is Dana Bezerra. Dana, this year you took over the presidency of the Heron Foundation. Congratulations. You joined Heron in 2006, directly overseeing their work with community beneficiaries on the ground, and previously you worked at Merrill Lynch in their private banking and investment group. The mission of the Heron Foundation is to help people and communities to help themselves out of poverty. This is not your usual foundation mission statement. In recent years, Heron's been evolving its model even further, learning that it's complex sometimes and contradictory with your relationship between funds dispersed in communities and those you aim to support, and then the investments that you make in the capital markets on the other hand. So having gone through something of your own transformation in Heron, what do you think you can share with the rest of us?
Well, thank you for having me, first of all. At Heron, we actually have a luxury in that we are a US domiciled private foundation. So we were created in the mid-1990s with a single gift, a single large gift. Over time, we've both engaged in the work that we do and grown that portfolio to be slightly north of 300 million, which in the US makes us relatively small. That said, we actually have the luxury of being founded solely to exist to serve a public purpose. So in the last couple of days, as Colin and others have talked about, business needs to find ways to profitably solve the problems of people, place, and planet. We get to chop off the first part of that sentence, and we exist to solve the problems of people, place, and planet. The profit motive is only secondary to us in terms of growing our investments. Luckily for the Heron Foundation, our leadership, almost since our founding, has challenged us to make sure that the totality of our investment portfolio reflects our mission, that it's simply not okay to be engaging in communities with charitable tools while investing in things that are causing more problems than our grant making could ever solve. So at Heron, in the same way that Colin and Bruno talked about, business sometimes loses its way by getting singularly focused on financial capital, I would argue actually we unfortunately have more in common with business than not as a field. A number of our colleagues, I think it's fair and rather public criticism to say, lose their way by getting very focused on the performance of their endowment rather than on the change they seek in the world. And at the Heron Foundation, I will confess, we've occasionally gotten distracted by data. A quick example, if I might. A number of years ago, about 8 years ago or so, we came through the economic crisis. We had been an asset building funder, came through the economic crisis realizing that assets didn't really perform very well for low-income people when an income was missing from the household. So to tell this story relatively concisely, we got a little bit self-righteous about income and job creation being the way to help people out of poverty. So we decided we were going to isolate job creation and companies with high headcount as a path for our work to move forward. So we isolated on companies that had high headcount per dollar of revenue. We thought if we could invest for-profit, nonprofit, public company, small enterprise, didn't matter, but for the model, we wanted high headcount per dollar of revenue. After spending a lot of time, 4,774 positions later, we came up with exactly what we should own: private prisons. You can imagine, as a poverty-focused organization, that was a very bad day for the Heron Foundation. And so part of the learning for us was that if, in the same way business loses its way by focusing on financial capital, we had lost our way by focusing on a single metric, thinking that we could distill the complexity of our modern economy and the corporations that operate in it to a single metric. So at the Heron Foundation, part of why we love EOM and the work that you do here, at the Heron Foundation, we started talking about really sort of torturing each other around, I understand the data, but do I want to own that company? For the totality of its effects on people, place, and planet, should we be engaging with that nonprofit or that corporation, et cetera? And what developed over time for us is a lens that we refer to as net contribution. Are the enterprises, NGOs to public companies, are they contributing or detracting from society's wherewithal? Conveniently, we look at human, natural, civic, financial, systemic, and knowledge capital. And each capital is underpinned by indicators, and indicators are underpinned by metrics. However, we're very, very cautious that we're not trying to measure everything. Sometimes it's not about measurement. It's about movement in the right direction. So for Heron, our lens on people, place, and planet, net contribution, obviously has lots in common with EOM.
So the last but not least panelist here is Martin Radvan. He's the global president of Mars Wrigley Confectionery. He's had a long career at Mars, working in many different regions and business segments, and I really hope I won't get in trouble for saying this, but the truth is he's been a Martian for longer than I've been an Earthling. And I'm okay? I'm okay?
Yeah, you're okay.
Joking aside, most recently he's overseen the integration of the Wrigley business and the Mars chocolate business, which is now Mars Wrigley Confectionery. It employs over 34,000 associates in 70 countries. But most importantly, in his career at Mars, he's endeavored not only to talk the mutuality principle, but also to walk it. And this is a fact that no doubt explains his longevity and outstanding reputation in the Mars business. So as the one corporate business leader on the panel this morning, we're looking to you for the inside story. So how would you describe the tone of the conversation amongst business executives on the question of transforming business as a force for the common good?
So first of all, thank you, Alastair, for the kind words, and thank you for reminding me the age. Your MBA student from Brazil yesterday, let me just say, I remember the 1970 World Cup very, very well. So one of the things that time gives you the advantage of is I can see some of the changes, and there are quite fundamental changes. And if I went back those more than 10 years when Bruno and I started this journey, there's some very, very big changes. And one of the things I've seen and I can testify to, and I've talked to here very very many times, just the power of good that business can be, the change that business can bring to both society, people, as well as financial capital. Well, let's talk about the climate. So I think Colin introduced it this morning. So let's talk about the external world. If you talk about our governments, well, I think in the Western world, we're unlikely to see much enlightenment. In fact, some of the things we're talking about, they're ideologically challenging them, but I think that it's very clear they're very inwardly focused. Perhaps from Asia we can learn, perhaps China and some of the areas they're certainly looking more further forward. But even if they do, then I think Professor Avishay in the conversation we had last night is absolutely clear. Even if they do decide to do it, the history says the success of doing it from the centre, of legislating your way into this, is not very high. And the professor will tell you, it didn't work last time. So you come then to business and talk about business. And there, I think there is a very fundamental shift. I can't remember the number of times yesterday I was trying to count it that Larry Fink's letter was mentioned. In the start of the year. And I brought, Loic mentioned the Financial Times. Here's an article from February, and it's talking about the launch of the Vanguard Fund, and a CEO 7 talking about their venture funds and the importance of looking beyond financial capital. They talk about climate change. They talk about the impact on society. They talk about diversity. And this is 7 venture funds. And the thing I loved is the quote from the journalist. This is a Financial Times journalist. This is not Bruno Roche 10 years ago. Yeah? What the letter shows is that Friedman's vision of capitalism is starting to look almost as passé as big shoulder pads. That is the Financial Times 2 months ago. Yeah, that's not Bruno. I would expect that from Bruno from my time with him. But that's a really fundamental shift. So there's a shift in big business, and that really is a change. But if you come back now to my world, my business, CPG, then if anybody doesn't think there's shifts going on, then wake up and smell the coffee. Yeah, life is changing. Disruption is happening. People want more choice. Our heartland, our retail, where we access, is changing enormously and will change even more. The barriers to entry, the thing I spent my life building up, the benefits of scale, the barriers to entry are coming down. And smaller players can take little pieces of the market, but you add all those little pieces together, they're big. Yeah? So disruption is here, whether we like it or not. So I think the last thing I'd say on the climate is this is the call to arms. You either disrupt or you are disrupted. So we can sit there, we can put our head in the sands, we can say it's going to go away, that our scale will come back and win again. But I think I saw yesterday the passion and the commitment from some of you students, and I think that's a very short-term answer. And certainly, if I was to hand on anything to anybody going forward, I'd say you disrupt or be disrupted. So I'd love to say there was a choice; it would be much more comfortable. But I don't think we have a choice. I think the things we're talking about today is reality. It's what we're going to do, but most of all, it's what we have to do.
Way. And other panelists, feel free to respond as Avishay does. So you were the president of a university or in a business school. In your opening statement, you mentioned the role of integrity and morals and personality. And I'd love you to share more about how education has a role in shaping that and maybe reflect on this next generation of leaders that we have in the room as well.
Thank you. First, I'm in a business school, but I'll tell you what I learned in my life. Life is only about people. You can learn many things. Incentive, yes. You choose the right people, you support the right people. That's the only secret, and you can write many models, but that's first the key issue. Second, since I come here I'm telling you my truth. Universities today are on the decline. Universities are becoming technological institutions to support technological innovation, and often in business school and in the new PR, people are learning how to join the network of the powerful people. What's missing in universities today, and in order to be a partner for moral, powerful leaders in business, universities have to be transformed. Oxford is the model. I must tell you the truth. The day I came yesterday, I was invited to St. Catherine College, and I said to the students, the world is interdisciplinary totally. There is no place anymore to study just engineering, etc., because humanities are dying. They're dying in America, they're dying in Israel, because people say, why to study humanities? But the human aspect is the most important of all. So therefore, what is needed to recreate it is institute of total interdisciplinary world when people express their point of view, and in spite of the crisis of finance, I just coming from Berkeley, I said with the chancellor there, when there is a cut by the state, by the so great leadership that exists in Washington, and you want to survive, and in order to survive, you try to appease either government or people to give the money, you lose your integrity of conversation. Somehow, places, and I think Oxford may be the exception, there is need for institution to reflect what doesn't work in the world, be open, and when you engage in interdisciplinary conversation, new solutions emerge. Therefore, universities also have to be transformed. They cannot be just separate technological institutions and business school that people are advancing through networking. And I'm saying it because you are the serving elite. Somehow, in this reflection that you want to advance and go to the places, you will see, like me, when you go to institution, that people don't walk the talk. And in the midst, you have to find your own way and your own salvation. But the key to transformation, that's the point, is not only Sue Martin or Moulier or some people in public corporation that are willing to go for the long term, is also the transformation of universities and educational institutions. And it's a must.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Any reflections or responses? No? Okay. Serena, I'd like to ask you another question about your business GoPurpose. You said that it was built deliberately around SDG 3, and that's to promote healthy lives and a well-being for all. And a lot has been said about SDGs over the last couple of years, both positive and negative, but I think we generally appreciate the consensus that this brings. But could you reflect on how you see the role of SDGs playing going forward, and why you chose to make that decision to build your business around SDG 3?
Sure. So in 2014, I actually started GoPurpose, which is a B2B model, is to create the flow capital between the startups, non-for-profits, social enterprises, to create solutions and a hybrid business model so that it could be self-sustaining. And some of our solutions has been very successful. Some of them are still transforming, and some of them are not, because a lot of it's not very easy to turn a non-for-profit mentality into a for-profit mentality and self-sustaining overnight. So over the past few years, we've been looking at guidelines, strict guidelines to follow for sustaining hybrid model, business model, is something that we could focus on. And after testing within these few years, and also being a volunteer advocate as businesswomen and banking career, I have decided to pick SDGs as a guideline. Obviously, SDGs are very broad guidelines and hasn't been actually broken down into various SOP standards, whereby we could actually clearly understand that for business and for the category and sectors of business, how we could follow SDGs, or even for governments, or even for for institutions how we could actually practice it in a more standardized and more strategic ways. Well, nevertheless, if we look back as the 17 SDGs, it is one of the biggest goals that was actually adopted in 2016 by 196 countries, being the fact that US actually backed out of it. But do you know what did all this country pledge for? They pledged for 2 goals. One, by 2030, there will be 0 carbon emission. And also you're supposed to keep the climate temperature under the 2 degrees Celsius. Do you actually know that? That's what 195 countries around the world that have pledged for. But the government hasn't really transpired and communicated with the mass public that we need to meet this goal by 2030. So the fact that I believed and picked goal number 3 to fight the climate change of goal number 13 is because without health, without being a state of well-being and health, having that for our body, we will not be able to do anything. And again, back to Avishay's comment, people are everything if we are having our life on this earth. We cannot be having robots overtaking us and serving us while we are almost dying at bed. You know, the last thing we want to see is another phone and another robots that is caretaking us. It's about human. So I built an SDG model, you know, having GoPurpose as a holding company for B2B and B2C model, and O2O, focusing on online and offline supply chain, matching the distributors, you know, on a transparent sourcing for a circular inclusive model to how the distributors are also sourcing through this entire supply chain. While at the same time, we are creating an e-commerce as well as an offline model whereby we build supply chain across the globe. So our goals are very ambitious, and we're looking at 195 countries to open our presence in these countries and to scale rapidly. I just want to finish it. Yeah, okay, thank you.
Dana, I wanted to pick up on the net contribution approach that you mentioned. And I'm interested in it because it's both a practice, but I also was wondering, how did that change the values and the culture element that we've been talking about this morning? How did they work with each other or complement each other within the organization?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's certainly an ongoing process. We think it's iterative. We hope to always be learning. It's part of why we're here. We think any framework, and in our case, net contribution, needs to hold lots of space to reflect the learnings we take in. So that's the first thing. It's not baked. It's not official. I can't hand it to you. But when we talk about the way it works, for us, it's both a lens that we use to assess an enterprise. And the difference for us was, as a poverty-focused organization, as philanthropies tend to do, we had certain interventions we thought would improve people, place, and planet through the lens of our mission. With net contribution entering our world, I think we now appreciate that was probably a bit of an arrogant position. And as asset owners and as philanthropists, we actually think we're called to know what is knowable about the total effect of our engagement with an enterprise or a community before we're allowed to overlay our specific mission lens on it. So we are not an environmental funder, for example, but that doesn't mean that we think we aren't called to understand the environmental effect of companies that we invest in and nonprofits that we engage in. So it has changed our thinking. It will continue to change our thinking. And I think one of the most important things we've come to understand, or that we're coming to understand and learn about, is that, much like somebody said yesterday, change the economy, change the world. I think part of what we've come to understand is a better way to analyze companies is about tinkering at the edge of the broken economy that created the inequality we suffer from. It is a better mousetrap operating in the current broken economy. We do that, we think we're called to do that, and We need to constantly be leaning into the emergent. What is the next economy that's going to better serve people? What is our role to pull that economy forward? It's not an either or, it's a both and, but to have the intellectual honesty that we're operating squarely in the place between stories. This story is ending. It is on hospice. We know that. But we can't see the next story from here. So what is our role in imagining it? And net contribution at least gives us the opportunity to think about that and to move away from a singularly focused economy on financial capital.
Thank you. I love the idea that it's somehow a muse for you to keep questioning yourself and driving further investigation into your model and your mission. Thank you for sharing that.
You should meet our board. We are driven to do that.
Martin, one of the biggest challenges of transformation is making it stick. So ensuring that even when you're facing headwinds, that the business stays true to its new course. I'm sure you've had experiences of this. Is there anything you could share with us?
Yes, so it's clearly, and I mentioned, business is tough. So the first thing, come back to the foundations. I love one of the quotes yesterday that the MBA student, he's not a social entrepreneur, he's a businessman. So we're in business, yeah? Let's face into it. So don't forget financial capital, yeah? Because when we go back to that conversation that Bruno and I had more than 10 years ago with our owner, when we did look at connections between growth and profit, there was one that was very clear. No profit meant out of business. Yeah? So we have to look at financial capital and we have to drive it. So I think the thing is, how do you embrace those things in a challenging time? How do you embrace them to help? And where does some of the longer term bets you make help people manage through that financial capital? So if you talk about natural capital, if you talk about some of the things we've done, so all of our plants, both in the US and now in the UK, are powered by sustainable power. Why does that give us an advantage? So why can I go to my CFO and say that gives us an advantage? One thing it's done is it takes out the volatility of the market. I've lived through oil price at $25 and oil price at $150. So your conversion cost, which is largely driven by oil, is going to be vastly different. So if you can say, okay, here's the price, sometimes it'll be better and sometimes it'll be worse, but we know it for the next 10 years. There's an advantage in building that into your financial capital model. Yeah? Occasionally, you just have to commit. Yeah? I think there's a great thing about jumping off the cliff, and our sustainable generation plans last April are pretty challenging, pretty difficult. The great news about that is that it's out there, it's done. I can't go back and say, well, we didn't actually mean that. Sorry. So committing people is really, really important. I think focusing on what you can do, I mean, again, the key learnings that we had from anything we've done in these areas is we can only do good where we have something to add, where we know something about the area. So we've worked on mint, we're now working on cocoa. Why did we choose distribution? Because that's what Wrigley are famous for, that we know how to teach people to sell. If it was working on medical equipment, what can I offer? So keeping you focused on things that you're good at, that's also going to help develop, will bring that through. And I think the biggest thing is not to be a prophet shouting in the desert. Engage other people. The single biggest benefit I can tell you from all the work we do is when I look around the table at my management team or old management teams or people working in the field. If you've ever worked in sales, and I've done many, many jobs, it's a tough job. It isn't sitting in a nice office. It isn't building strategies and plans. It's going out. It's doing lots of calls a day. It's being shouted at. It's being abused. It's tough. Yeah. Now you give somebody in that environment, they're doing this, but they're also doing something positive. You see the engagement. You see and it's not here. It's here. It comes up. Loic talked about when you talk about in rural Canada, you're making a difference, a better world for pets. How much more inspiring is that than selling a can of dog food? And we all want that. I want that. My kids want that. You want that. So I think finding those ways to engage the organisation and powerful that you are making financial capital. You're not a social entrepreneur. You're a businessman or woman. But what you're doing is building something bigger and stronger. I think that's the way to manage some of the headwinds and get people engaged in really the ultimate target.
Thank you. So I'm reliably informed we have 3 minutes and 30 seconds left. It'd be great to hear any closing reflections on what you've heard.
I think we should actually try to perhaps talk what is our end goal a bit. So for GoPurpose, our end goal is to, one, fight climate change by growing and supporting our climate, organic and natural producers, because again, what Bruno and Professor Maya said, when we put in good input into our society, into our environment, good output will come out. And so as back to our health. So second would be to protect and prevent health diseases, because today's day, we're not ready. We're not ready to face our increased number of population that will be coming up to 10 billion people by 2030. And third, for us, is to bridge the disparity. Thank you.
Great. So I would say the power of partnerships, again, if there's one thing we've learned, we can't do it alone. You know, when we try to do it alone, we failed spectacularly. What we learn from foundations, you know, just talking just over breakfast yesterday, learning how they've done and how they run things, that's fantastic. When we try and do our work in Kenya or finding the right people is incredibly difficult, and you're never going to do that as a corporation with an advert in the newspaper. You need NGOs, you need other people. You know, I listened to some of the things I saw this morning. So I think my biggest piece is that this is not done by business to the world. This is done with business, with the world, and you know, I'm honoured and humbled to be up here with these people. But learning from the partnerships, what you've done, what you've learned, and how we can build that together is really, really important.
And I would say, because I think Avishay will be the perfect person to tie us up, that I would say honor complexity. The work is hard, and for us, we have the luxury of seeing the decisions corporations in other countries make. Those decisions hit the ground in places. And as an asset owner and a provider of capital, the decisions we make in capital purveyance hit the ground in places. And places are components pulled together of people. And for us to lose sight of the people in the economy is a mistake. And so honor the complexity. It makes your world harder, but I think it's something that we're called to do.
I'll just say that it's a privilege to be here. I first think that Oxford is a different planet. You are chosen to be here, and indeed you work in interdisciplinary way. And many of you want to do good in addition to being successful privately. So it's inspiration for me personally, and I'm sure to be with people like that, to start a movement in which, as Martin and Dana just said, by creation a leadership of serving elite, other people will join. It may be Oxford, it may be Berkeley, it may be Mars, tomorrow somebody else, but there is enough committed group of people in the middle of the crisis that will come to replace the old order. You will build a new world, and we'll be back there to support you. Thank you.